Welcome to WPL's virtual cooking class, Boring Dinner Do-Over with Chef Kim. Chef Euchstetter is a graduate of the former Girls Trade in Worcester and the Culinary Institute of America. She began teaching in 2005 and in 2010 joined Worcester Technical High School as a culinary instructor and has taught cooking classes at WPL since 2017. This project has been funded with federal funds from the National Library of Medicine, National Institutes of Health with the University of Massachusetts Worcester. Thank you, Kim.
Thank you so much, and I appreciate everybody joining me this early on a beautiful Saturday. But at least the good thing is we'll get some great recipes done, and then everybody can enjoy the rest of the day. So I was at a loss when we started talking about what we would do for this class, and we spent a lot of time at school this year really looking at different ethnicities, different recipes, and kind of combining both ethnic recipes and healthier cooking. And so these are some of the recipes that we've actually presented at the school. And not only did we love them, but they were very well received with the students and with the staff. So that's what we're going to have today. I've given 4 different recipes in the packet or linked to the class, and we're going to make 2 of them today, but I'll talk through the other pieces as well. That way, if there's any questions, everybody can feel comfortable making these. I would say probably the best thing about all of these recipes is I don't think any one of them takes longer than an hour to put together. And that's start to finish, cooking time, prep time, everything included. So it's not as though you need to spend forever in your kitchen trying to get something ready. And 2 of them, in general, you can kind of prep and then they just finish on their own, which I think makes it great, because then you can take a little time to sit down and read some of your book. So we're going to do today, we're going to start one portion of a recipe, and then we're going to move on to the other. So we're preparing today the vegetable, I don't know if I wrote it down right, the vegetarian stuffed peppers, Greek style. And then we're preparing the Moroccan turkey stew, which sounds exotic. It's incredibly flavorful and makes a great stew. So for the stuffed peppers, we're going to start our rice first, because that's going to take about 15 or 20 minutes to cook. And I want to get that kind of steamed and set aside so that when we're ready to make the peppers, we don't have to wait for that to happen. So I'm just going to take my rice, and I particularly like an arborio rice for this. This is the same rice you would use for making risotto, and it's a short grain rice. The reason that I like it for the stuffed peppers is because if you use a white rice, just a plain white rice, maybe a jasmine, maybe a basmati, if you're familiar with those types, they're great because they're not sticky. And so they're perfect if you want a nice light rice, something that's going to go underneath something. But for this recipe, you want rice that's going to be a little bit sticky. It's going to hold together. It's going to hold its shape. It's going to give you better flavor overall. So that's why I use an arborio for this. If you don't have an arborio, you can certainly use a plain white rice. You can use I've used sushi rice before. That works perfectly. Of course, you can use a basmati, but you're not going to get the stickiness that you really want for this recipe. So that's why I don't use that. So I've got 3/4 of a cup of rice, and I'm just going to rinse it. A lot of people don't rinse their rice before they cook it. Some do, some don't. What it does is, if you've ever rinsed your rice and seen it, there's a lot of cloudiness to it, and it's the processing and everything. So you want to wash all that off your rice. It's not going to hurt you if you don't, but you just want to wash it till your water runs clear. And then we're going to use 1.5 cups of water for 3/4 of a cup of rice. So it's a 2-to-1 ratio. And I've got my water on. I'm going to rinse my rice, and I'm not even going to really wait for this to come to a boil, which is normally what I would do. Bring my water to my boil, add my rice, stir it, and then turn it to simmer and put a cover on it. I don't really have to with this because I'm going to undercook it. I want my rice to have a little bit of a give to it so that I can finish cooking it in the pan when I'm making my filling. So this is not one where you have to cook it all the way through. So I'm just going to rinse my rice. And sometimes people will add seasonings to the water. They'll add butter, they'll add oil, they'll add salt and pepper. None of these are necessary. You could add a pinch of salt. It's just going to infuse some flavor into your rice. So I'll put a little pinch of it in there. It doesn't need a lot. Again, you're going to get a lot of flavor when you cook this the second time in the pan for finishing the recipe. So I am going to wait a couple seconds just till it gets a little bit warmer, and then we'll get the rice right in there and we'll get that cooking. Meanwhile, I've got this lovely turkey breast on my cutting board, and the Moroccan turkey stew calls for a boneless, skinless turkey cutlets or thighs. Now, I'm going to preface this whole recipe by saying that you can take this entire recipe and cook it in the crock pot. So you can really simplify it and let it go low for about 6 hours and have dinner later on in the afternoon, or you can speed it up, which is what I've done by using the turkey breast, and I'm going to cut it off the carcass and make it a little bit faster. So you can do it either way. However, if you are going to do it in a crock pot, I strongly recommend a thigh or something with a bone in it, because it's going to add moisture and keep it more flavorful when you cook. Anytime you've got the bone in something when you're cooking it in the crock pot, it's just going to help it to stay more moist and not get dried out, even though cooking in a crock pot, that helps it as well. So I am going to take, and they do sell, the other thing is it's hard to find a whole turkey right now. If you've looked at the market, they're there, but they're a little scarce and they are enormous. And I typically don't cook a whole turkey, oddly enough, after Thanksgiving. I'll do pieces, parts. So the breasts are usually easy to find, as are the half breasts like I have here, or the cutlets. So I'm just going to remove the skin, and it comes up pretty easily. The bone I would definitely probably save, because you can make some nice turkey soup, make a nice little stock with it. But for now, I'm just going to get that skin cut off. I think I need to sharpen my knife. Okay, water's just about, my water's hot. All my rice is going to go in. And we're just going to let that, I'm going to cover that, and we're going to give that, 15 minutes to cook. Normally, your rice is going to take about 20 minutes, start to finish. We're going to undercook it, as I said. And if there's any moisture left in here, we're going to dump the remaining water out. That way we just have the nice cooked rice, and it's not going to absorb any more water as it sits. So I'm going to put some gloves on here for working with the turkey, just because it's easier than washing my hands every couple of seconds. So I'm going to get my cover on my rice, turned it down, and I'm just going to get my turkey ready here. So again, if you've got a turkey cutlet, those are just, they've taken the turkey breast off of the bone here and cut it into pieces, almost like chicken cutlets. So they're very easy to work with. The only problem with them is they tend to be very thin. And with this recipe, you want a bigger chunk if you can get it, because that's going to cook a little bit longer. And I'm not sure if people realize, but when you're working with any kind of poultry, whether it be chicken or turkey or duck, anything like that, your dark meat is always going to be more flavorful and have more moisture than your white meat. Your white meat is leaner, which is why a lot of people prefer a white meat, because it has less fat. but it also dries out quicker. So when we're doing a recipe like this, it seems bizarre, but I'm going to cut these in really big chunks because the larger the chunk, they'll cook at the same time as everything else in my pot, but they'll dry out less. And so we definitely want to have a nice moist turkey for this because it's just going to have great flavor. So I've got my turkey breast cut off the bone. It's all skinned. Okay. My tenderloin is here, and I'm going to cut that up in just a minute. So I'm going to get this cut into pretty big chunks. You know, probably 1 to 2 inch cubes, and keep it pretty big. And then we'll get the rest of everything together for this, get this seasoned. So that's a really pretty good sized chunk, if you can see that. It's not small, and I'm going to try and match that. There we go. Once this is all cut up, and now it says 2 pounds in the recipe. 2 pounds is a really good amount. And if you was using thighs, I definitely would. I like to use both if given the opportunity. A little bit of thighs and a little bit of breast, just because it adds extra flavor and it keeps it nice and moist. So, all right. My turkey is cut. I've got that into a bowl. I'm going to get this cleaned up and out of the way. Take my gloves off. I'm going to wash my knife really quick. Cross-contamination in the kitchen. Whoop, my rice is boiling over. Cross-contamination of anything in the kitchen is probably the biggest #1 reason anybody ever gets sick. It's not that food is undercooked so much as it is that, you know, you forget to, you know, wash your knife in between things, or you might have touched something. That's usually the biggest reason people get sick. So I've got my turkey cut up here. All right. All nice. And then the rest of the recipe is butternut squash, which we're going to get cut up. So I've got a beautiful butternut squash here. It's carrots, it's chickpeas, it's some chickpeas, it's whole peeled tomatoes. And again, you can get a bigger can. They actually have small cans, and a small can is perfect for this amount of recipe, because you don't want an overwhelming taste of tomato. You want all these other really good flavors to come through. Because also going in there, and this is going to sound really weird, but this is phenomenal, is it's got apricots and raisins. And it's, if anybody has ever done or heard of any African style cooking, there's something called a tagine. And a tagine is a stew that's cooked in a special pot. This is very similar to that. And there's always some kind of fruit in their making their tagines, usually a raisin or something. And it's just another way of adding, you know, if you got kids, it's a great way to sneak a little something extra in there, and they don't know they're eating it, and it's fantastic. And you can sneak in a lot of healthiness in this. So again, with the carrots, the butternut squash, the turkey, this is really a low fat, filling, very tasty recipe. So I'm going to take my butternut squash, and I'm not going to peel it. You'll notice I will peel it with my knife. You could use a vegetable peeler if you want. I find when I'm working with a butternut squash, I like to use the neck for starters, because the neck doesn't have any seeds in it. It's easier to cut. And I like to peel it as if I would a cantaloupe or something, if I was peeling a whole fruit. And I'm going to start up at the top, and I'm just going to cut straight down, which is going to remove the skin. And if you've ever tried to peel a butternut squash with a peeler, if your peeler is not super sharp, this is not easy. So I prefer to stand it up and use my knife to do it, because I can see where the rind is, and I can also get a cleaner faster cut than I would if using my paring knife. I mean, my peeler. So that's all done. Now, obviously the round is going to be a lot tougher if you do it that way, but you still can cut the sides in the same way. And it makes it a little bit easier to handle, in my opinion. So we got a bowl for trash over here. So now I'm going to take this and I'm going to cut it into big chunks. Now we want chunks that are going to be almost the same size as our turkey, because they're going to simmer for the same amount of time. So everything's going in the pot all at once and it's going to cook. If we don't want this to be like mashed butternut squash, we want some pretty good sized chunks here. So I'm going to cut a really nice big cube there. And you know what? I'm going to move this here. There we go. And I'm going to get my butternut squash. And meanwhile, my rice is just about ready. So I'm going to take that off in just a minute. So I've got my butternut squash is going to go in one bowl with carrots and red onion. Now, the recipe calls for 3 red onions. And that's actually what the recipe called for when I'm making this. I'm actually going to say cut that down. I think that's going to be too much. I love the flavor of an onion in a stew, but I think 3 is going to be a lot more than what you really want. So I would go with definitely 1 to 1.5 based on the amount of vegetables that you end up with. Carrots again, probably about 4 carrots. So I've got those. I'm going to get those nice and trimmed up. And then these are going to be cooked at the exact same time. So we want nice big chunks in this. So these are not going to be pretty. I'm going to cut them in half, and then I'm going to do nice big pieces so that they have an opportunity to cook at the same time. This is a very hearty stew. Definitely these pieces are going to be enormous on your spoon or on your fork, but the flavors are so fantastic that you will not mind. Have you ever done any Moroccan cooking before?
I haven't. I've done
No,
some
I haven't either.
like Indian curries or Thai curries at home.
Mhm. Yeah.
Oh, they're
I
Anybody
tend to
else?
struggle with like rice dishes.
phenomenal.
I've never been
So
able
let's
to make
see.
rice
Oh,
well. And maybe it's a rinsing thing. I don't rinse my rice,
really?
but it always comes out
Um,
terrible. It's like never fluffy. I don't know what I'm doing wrong. I try not to open the lid, and I don't know, a few rice tips, I would love it.
Sometimes it's also the brand of rice you buy, and that there's a lot of them that they're either pre-rinsed, they're parboiled, and so even if you follow the 2-to-1 recipe and the ratio and you do everything right, they end up really sticky. I would say cut back on the amount of water that you use. So instead of being a straight one, I would do like 1.5, and then you can always add more. I feel like a lot of times you're right, and that you go to cook your rice, and all of a sudden you do everything right, and then you take it out, and it's mush. It will come off the spoon. I would say shorten the cooking time. Well, maybe you would have to, but definitely I would cut some of the water back, and that way what it'll do is it'll steam less, so that again you could always add a little bit more. And I would cut the cooking time down, maybe at least by 5 minutes, pull it off the stove and let it sit. The other big thing people do, fluff it with a fork. Don't use a spoon.
Right.
Because spoon is definitely going to increase that starchiness.
Okay. Good tips. Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. The other thing you can do is try it in the oven. People do the oven method all the time. So you get your water boiling, and you have a pan that you're going to put your rice in. So you put your rice in it can be a casserole dish, whatever you're going to cook it in. It could even be your pot if it can go in the oven. Get your water hot, add your rice, cover it, maybe add a little bit of butter. I like a little butter in mine, and just throw it in the oven and let it cook in the oven at about 350. It'll take maybe a few minutes longer, but it usually, for whatever reason, comes out very well. That's how we do it in professional kitchens when we're making a large amount. We always do it in the oven. And it works perfectly.
Interesting.
Yep.
I never knew that. Cool.
Yep. And if I'm doing it just in a casserole dish, I'll cover it with plastic wrap and foil because that'll allow it to steam, but it also won't overcook it. Again, if you leave it in there too long, it's going to be mush, just like anything would. But, you know, you check it after about 20, 25 minutes. It's usually pretty well done. And again, just fluff it with a fork, let it sit for a few minutes. And then we've always had good luck with that.
Nice.
Rice is one of those weird things too. So again, I went so quick. So I'm taking my onion and I'm just doing probably about 2 or 3 cuts out of the hole across the onion. And then I'm going to cut that in half. So I've got some really big chunks here again. The one difference that I am going to do, and I don't think I wrote this in the recipe, squash, chickpeas, carrots, onions, raisins, jalapenos. Oh, okay. My onions are going to go with my turkey. So I think I even forgot to list them in the recipe for some reason. But my onions are going to go in with my turkey because this is a personal preference of mine. When I go to cook my turkey, when I go to get this done, I want to make sure that my onions are getting cooked at the same time. I hate a raw onion flavor in anything that I'm cooking. So I'm going to go ahead and get my onions sauteed with my turkey so that it's not a raw onion flavor when I go to cook this. And what I'm going to do, because I just realized I'm talking too long, like I usually do, and I got to get my turkey seasoned so that we can get this cooked. So my rice, I think you can see, there's just some nice light holes in it where you can see that the water's boiled out. That's going to be done. And again, this one I want to be a little bit sticky, so you can see it's still a little bit wet. I think you can see that. But I am going to set that aside just that way so that it can cool, and then it'll be ready for our peppers. Okay, turkey. We're going to take allspice and salt. We're going to mix it into a little bowl. So I've got 3 teaspoons of salt and 1 teaspoon of allspice. And we're going to mix that together. And I'm going to season my turkey with that all over. And then I'm going to use the rest of it in my vegetables. All right. So I'm going to mix that up. And allspice is got, you know, I don't often have it. I mean, I keep it in my cabinet, but it's one of those weird things that sometimes you don't have. I believe it's a blend of some cinnamon and a little bit of clove if you need to mix some on your own, but there is definitely a ratio to do that. So I mix the two together, and I'm going to put about half of this on my turkey and my onions. And meanwhile, what I've done is I turned my olive oil on in my pan. That's heating up. And as soon as that gets hot, I'm going to give a nice good sear to my turkey here with my onions. So what I really want to do is get that in the bottom of the pot. And I don't want to move it. I just want to let it caramelize, kind of stick to the bottom of the pan. It'll tell me when it's ready to be moved, because it won't stick to the bottom of the pan anymore. And that's kind of when you know you've got a nice sear, is that the meat is cooked and it's ready to release itself from the bottom of the pan. The more you keep stirring it and moving it, you're not going to get beautiful color on it, number one. And number two, what's going to happen is you're going to steam it more, and that's going to release moisture. So you just, it's hard to sit there and let it cook, but that's really what you want to do. So just waiting for that to get nice and hot. While we're doing that, let's see. I need apricots and raisins ready to go. So all this is going to go in the pot at the same time. So it's about a half a cup of apricots. And I'm just going to chop them up a little bit. They don't need to be whole, but I could probably do a few more on there. Half a cup of apricots and a quarter cup of raisins. Raisins are going to go right in the bowl. Those don't need to be chopped. And then I'm going to season all of my carrots and my squash with more of the allspice as well. So about a quarter cup. You notice how nicely I measure that. Kind of a guess. The more you do this, the more you can eyeball things and figure out. So my pan is just about ready here. I'm going to cut my apricots in half. I want nice big pieces. But again, I don't want a whole apricot. I think that would definitely be overwhelming. And if you're trying to hide some veggies from people who might say that they don't like them in food, if you leave them whole, they'll definitely be noticeable. So if you cut them up a little bit smaller, then you can get away with, oh, that's just, something sweet in there. Don't really have to let on what they are. And jalapeno, and then that's it. So, all right. I'm going to sear the turkey in the oil and then add my tomatoes. So waiting for this one more second to be hot. Meanwhile, while we're waiting on that, I can get my peppers in the oven in just a second. I'm kind of bouncing back and forth between the two so that we can start and get them in. Oh, okay. All right, pan is nice and hot. All my turkey and my onions are going to go in, and I'm going to give them a nice sear. So when you do something like this, what you want to do is make sure that you don't overcrowd the pan. So everything that's in my pan fits evenly on the bottom, and they're not stacked up on top of each other. And that's another way that you will lose some moisture from your turkey or chicken or whatever you're stewing, is if they're all stacked up on top of each other, they're going to sweat and they're not going to sear. And so that's where you also, again, lose some of that moisture because they release the moisture instead of searing. So you just want to make sure that your pan is a good size. And I'm just going to let that sit, and I'm going to let that get seared and start cooking, and I'm not going to touch it. Meanwhile, I'm going to take the rest of my allspice and my salt, and I am going to season my vegetables. Make sure that they're tossed in with that. And the allspice is really the key flavor here. It really adds a lot to this recipe. It gives it that something that you really can't quite put your finger on, but is phenomenally delicious. So, all right, we're letting that cook. We're going to bounce back a second to our stuffed peppers. So our rice is done. I like to use a green pepper. No other reason than they're cheaper. And so that's the only reason why. Red peppers, yellow peppers, orange peppers, anything are fine. I like to try and find two that are either kind of even in shape or about the same size so that they cook at the same time. A lot of recipes will tell you to cut the top off and trim the bottom so that they lay flat. You're going to stuff them upright. I like to cut them in half because that way when I'm serving them, I'm going to stuff them so that it's a half a pepper. And that way, if that's too full, you only have to eat a half versus trying to cut the whole pepper. And it's a weird way of thinking, but that's my train of thought. So I'm going to cut them in half, top to bottom. And my turkey is looking great here. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to lay these in a pan. I've got this beautiful cast iron pan. I'm going to lay them upside down in the pan, and I'm going to put them in my oven at 350 degrees. And what that's going to do is that's going to start to blister the tops a little bit. If you wanted to peel them, if you don't love pepper skins, at this point in time, I would spray this with a little cooking spray or rub a little oil on them. And when you put them in the oven, they're going to blister. That skin is going to start to pull up, and you can peel these and peel the skin off after they're par cooked before you stuff them. Some people don't like the skin after it's cooked. They don't like that about a stuffed pepper because of that comes off separately. So that's an easy way to do that. But if you just want to blister them, you're going to put them in the oven like this. Probably give them 5 to 10 minutes. All you're doing is par cooking them so that they're not a raw pepper when you go to finish this. So I'm going to pop these in my oven. And we're going to come back to our turkey. I'm going to show you what it looks like. cooking in there nicely. I'm going to give that a quick stir. And as you can see, it didn't take me anything to stir this because my turkey, we're going to see if I can grab a piece. My turkey is getting nice and brown. You can see that beautiful coating on the top of it. And that's because it had plenty of time to sit here and get that beautiful coloring before I tried stirring it. And so it, by the nature of it releasing itself, it said, I'm good, I can be stirred. So we'll give this a few more seconds and then get the other side nice and brown. Then we're gonna get our tomatoes in there. Could I use a diced tomato if I didn't have whole peel? Absolutely, absolutely. The idea is that you're going to have nice big chunks of tomato in there, but you really want the juice. So there's a lot of juice in the whole peeled tomatoes, where there's a little bit less in the diced tomatoes because it's more about diced tomatoes. So this is about a little bit more juice and a little less tomato. But in a pinch, you can substitute. There's certainly no problem. Could I use fresh? Sure, absolutely. The only problem would be if you don't like a tomato skin in there. All right, so that's looking good. Smells great. I'm going to get my tomatoes in there. I am going to throw some gloves on. Just, again, no, you don't have to. As long as your hands are clean. I love to play with my food. Get your hands right in there. It's going to be cooked. And I'm going to kind of break them up as I put them in here. Which is messy. I could break these up ahead of time, and it wouldn't be quite so bad. All right, so that cooled the pan down considerably because I just added a whole bunch of liquid into it. So I've got that broken up. Now I'm going to add my squash, my carrots, my apricots, everything right in there. Now, if I was doing this in a crock pot, I would put my turkey in the bottom and then all my vegetables on top and my tomatoes, and I wouldn't use, my recipe here calls for 2 cups of stock. I may or may not use that depending on if I'm cooking the turkey with the bone. I maybe would add a cup, because the idea of using the crock pot is that it's naturally going to release its juices. The vegetables are, the turkey is, and so that's going to keep it moist, and you don't need the extra liquid. With this being a stew, as you can see, there's more stuff than there is liquid in here. So we definitely need to add liquid. Otherwise, we're just going to have turkey and a bunch of vegetables that are cooked down. So we're going to get some chicken stock. We're going to add about 2 cups. I'm trying to think if I'm missing anything in here. All right. So now that is cooking, and we're just going to give that a quick stir. Beautiful. I'm going to get a cover on it to help it cook a little bit faster. And that's going to sit, because those pieces are kind of small, this should probably be done in another 20-25 minutes, just about when we're finishing up our class. I'm going to let it cook at a little bit higher temp than I normally might. I would probably turn it down to a simmer. That way we don't lose so much liquid. But we're going to go ahead and let that cook and get that done so that we can take a quick look at it when we're done. So, oh, silly me. I forgot the chickpeas. Those have to go in there too. So we're going to rinse these. And so again, really, really hearty. You got your chickpeas, your tomatoes, your butternut squash, your carrots, everything in there. Get these rinsed and right in there. Okay. One thing that I've always said when I'm teaching the students or classes or things like this, if you are watching your sodium, the one thing that I would always do is maybe cut back a little bit on when I mixed my allspice with my salt in the beginning, maybe hold back a teaspoon or two, because usually any kind of beans or peas that you buy in a can is packed in as some kind of sodium solution. So they've got some kind of a preservative in there. And so these can tend to be salty, especially like your black beans and your kidney beans. You can get a low salt version if you want to cut back on that. But we also used a cooking stock. So we've added salt. There's usually salt in the cooking stock. And then your beans also are going to have some. So if you're watching your sodium, I would definitely cut back on the amount of salt that I started with, because you're going to get it from 3 other places, or you pick a cooking stock that has no salt added. Those would be my recommendations. And that way you just make sure that you're not over salting it, because once we've got it in there, we can't get it out. And if we put too much in the beginning, the whole end result is going to be salty. So just something to note. It's always something I like to mention. Okay. So our peppers are in the oven. I'm going to take a quick peek at them. I think they're doing pretty well. All right, so I don't know if you can see this. They're just starting to blister a little bit. I don't think you can very well, but they're getting wrinkly on the top, like they're just starting to blister some. They're still pretty firm. I'm going to put them back in for about 5 more minutes, and we're going to get the filling going here. I wrote down that we're going to use creminis and shiitakes. The main reason is that I love shiitakes. They're probably one of my favorite mushrooms. And creminis are just a heartier, bigger flavor mushroom than a plain button mushroom, although they're really not that much different. Could I use portobellos? Absolutely. I think portobellos would be phenomenal. People are very weird about portobellos. They either like them or they don't, because I hear people say that they're muddy, that they're really kind of with the gills and everything on the bottom. When you cook them, you know, they really look like dark mud soup. And my suggestion would be is you can take a spoon and you can scrape all those gills out, so that you're left with nothing but the cap. You won't have nearly as much muddiness, and you'll have all that great flavor. It won't look as dirty and as weird. I think portobellos are great because they're really, really meaty and give you a big flavor. So what we're going to do, first things first, I'm sure everybody has an opinion on mushrooms. Mushrooms are about 98% water. And so if you wash your mushrooms, what you're really doing is they're like a sponge, and they're just going and they're sucking up all that moisture. And then they're going to release all that moisture when you go to cook them. And so you might not get the best flavor. So if I'm going to saute these, I just take a paper towel and I just brush the dirt off. And I don't know if everybody knows how mushrooms grow. You know, obviously they grow in I actually had the pleasure of going to a mushroom cave when I was in France a couple of years ago. Let me tell you, it was the coolest thing I've ever seen. And they have these blocks of growing mediums that are like hay, but they infuse it with organic compost, meaning, you know, cleaned poop, basically. And what they do is that they grow out of the sides of these in this environment. And it's really cool. But my point is that everybody, you know, looks at it and they go, oh, it's dirt and it's disgusting. And it's, you know, like, we know it's grown in poop. It's a growing medium. So it's really not like it's as bad as what you think when you hear about it. So if you just brush it off with a nice dry paper towel, then you're getting the dirt off, and you're also not bruising the mushroom, because you want this to have as much flavor as you can. And the more that you soak them, the more that you're just kind of adding moisture to it instead of really having a true flavor of a mushroom. So I'm just brushing all the dirt off, and I'm doing it over a bowl. That way I don't do it on my cutting board. And then I'm going to trim my stems off, and I'm going to get these diced up. My stew is boiling nicely here. And we're literally just going to dice these. And it seems like a really large quantity of mushrooms. I've got 8 ounces of mushrooms, but as everybody who's ever cooked mushrooms knows, they cook down to nothing. So this is going to look like a huge bowl of mushrooms, and we're going to end up with really not that much when we're all done. So I'm just cutting this into strips, and just like dicing, I'm just going to turn it and cut it into big chunks. The idea of doing this is that slices are nice, but they're a little bit harder to eat. And I want something that's going to be on my fork that's going to have some weight to it. It's going to look nice in my stuffing, and it's going to have a lot of great flavor. So the recipe here for the mushrooms, you could substitute mushrooms with, let's say you didn't want to do a vegetarian version. Let's say you wanted to add meat. You could do ground chicken and do the same basic recipe, but use chicken instead of mushrooms. I like to try and do, 1 to 2 meals every week that's non-meat, and just really, I don't know, it makes me feel good. So I'm going to put those into a bowl, and then we're going to do our shiitakes. I think it's about time for our peppers to come out of the oven. The stems on the shiitakes, if you like shiitakes, are fantastic, but the stems are not really edible. So these ones you always want to remove. They are very tough, very hard to cut, and you're just not going to be able to chew them. I make a stock out of them if I want to have a nice flavor. These will go in some water with some bay leaves or a little bit of aromatics, and I can cook those up and make a beautiful mushroom stock if I was going to, if I wanted to use it in a risotto, in a soup, to cook something. So again, we try and use everything that we can. I hate throwing food out in any way. So I'm going to finish getting these cooked, cut. And then I think we can check our mushrooms, and we'll take a look at our stew. Stew is cooking nicely over here. Is there anything anybody would like to ask while I'm cutting away here? Okay. All right. So we have this big, beautiful bowl of mushrooms. Again, it's quite a bit. And then we're going to need a couple cloves of garlic. I'm going to grab the peppers. They're perfect. Okay, so you can see where they started to wrinkle on the top. Right now, if I wanted to, I can peel that skin off on some of these. I'm not going to, but I'm going to use them just like that. I will flip them over and take the seeds out in just a second. We're going to let that cool. Meanwhile, our stew is cooking over here. And it's really coming along nicely. I think you can see that. I'm going to bring that over in a second, but we're going to keep that covered up and let that simmer a little bit longer. So normally, I'm going to turn the heat down a little bit. I don't want it to boil because, again, boiling will make it super tough, but I do want to let it simmer so that it cooks nicely and that the vegetables cook. So I just covered it, turned it down, probably to about medium. That way we can get that finished. All right, we need some garlic here, a couple cloves of garlic, and a half a red onion. We'll get those cut up. We'll get our filling done, and we will have our pepper stuffed. What I really like about this recipe is that it's a lot of ingredients that, I normally keep peppers at home. I normally have garlic and feta cheese. So I've got some great stuff here that isn't like you have to run out and buy a whole bunch of different things, which is kind of nice about the turkey too, except for the apricots. I don't always have apricots, but the recipe is going to use probably half a bag so that if you want to make it again, you can at least make it twice without having to really put yourself out going to the store. Right. So while we're getting this chopped, And the last piece will be my tomatoes. And this recipe calls for Roma tomatoes. I like a Roma tomato because they have less seeds than let's say a sliced tomato or a tomato you might put on a sandwich. And so they're a little bit easier to work with in a recipe. And I like the way that they cook up better. They're a little bit firmer. They tend to have a lot better flavor as well. All right, garlic's done. Garlic and onions are going to go separately because they're going to cook at a different time than the mushrooms. I really want to get that beautiful brown caramelization on my mushrooms when I cook this. That's going to give you a lot better flavor from the mushroom, is if you really get a hot pan and you really let those mushrooms, again, just like I did with the turkey, you want to throw them in there and not touch them. The more that you touch your mushrooms, what happens is they just steam and all that liquid comes out and you end up steaming your mushrooms, which they taste okay, but you're going to get better flavor. And I think you'll feel like it's more meaty if you let it get really nice and caramelized. So, and to do that, you just like I did with the turkey, you just got to let it sit and cook. So, got my other onion here, and we're going to dice this pretty small, and then we're going to start cooking everything because the mushrooms are going to take a few minutes, and then the tomatoes are going to take a few minutes just to get ready. Turn that down a little bit. Here we go. So I'm just going to dice my onion. I'm just going to cut some nice thin slices. I'm going to probably use about a half to a quarter of this. It's a pretty big onion. And if you notice, I just laid my onion down to dice it, cut it up. And I don't want my onion to be my overpowering flavor in this. So that's the other reason I chose a red onion. I think I've got a sweeter flavor, and I think they go really well in this. If you really wanted to get adventurous, I've done it in the past before. I put a little spinach in here as well. I love the flavor of spinach, and it really makes it look beautiful because then you've got the red from the tomatoes, a little bit of purplish from the onion. You got the mushrooms, and then you got the spinach, and it's a beautiful dish. These could also be made ahead of time and then reheated. They're just going to take a little bit longer to heat. And then your rice might get a little bit overcooked. So I would definitely not make them and then wait 3 days to cook them, but you could certainly make them and then cook them the next day. Onions are done. Garlic is done. Mushrooms are done. Peppers, we're going to pull these stems out of. And they just cooled slightly. So I'm just going to take them and very carefully put my fingers right in there and just pull that seed out. Now it's hot, obviously. I could let it cool a little bit longer, but I've got my beautiful pepper now that I can kind of stuff. Now I can control how much I put in there, and that's why I do this way, because that way, if I serve this, let's say with a nice salad, then maybe I only want half a pepper, and maybe I don't want a whole thing, and that's the main reason I do it as a half. Ooh, that's hot. Yeah, they get a little tippy sometimes. Sometimes they fall over, but all right. So all our seeds are out. Those are ready to go. Last piece is going to be our tomatoes. So Roma tomatoes, the easiest way to dice these, I'm going to show you. We may have been over this before. So you're going to take them and hold them straight up and down and cut them in half. And then I cut them into quarters for no other reason than it's easier to handle. And I think that you can see this pretty well. I want to make sure I'm at the right angle. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take my knife and I'm going to hold my knife flat and I'm just going to cut just the seeds out. So what I end up with is I've got this quarter of a tomato that I just took the seeds out of. And for me, that's the easiest way to do this so that I'm getting as much of the tomato as I can, but as few seeds. I could, if I was uncomfortable doing it that way, take my knife and just run it along each side and do it that way as well. It doesn't work as well because the tip of your knife is at a bad angle, but this is, for me, the easiest way to do this and get those seeds right out of there. You could do this if you wanted to make salsa and you don't like seeds in your salsa. I always cut my tomatoes like this if I'm going to make a nice little fresh salsa. And I'm not a big seed person when it comes to the tomatoes. Sandwich is fine, but not with something like this. So, and then I'm going to cut these into strips. So again, I'm going to dice my tomatoes here. So cutting them into strips, and I'm going to move my pan off and we can get cooking. Oh, geez. Well, this filling, thankfully, will only take us a few minutes to put together. And then we can check our turkey. So 2 tomatoes are probably a good amount depending on how big they are. If they're small, maybe I would do 3. If you really like tomatoes, you could always do more. Again, the big thing is this isn't about the tomato, it's more about the peppers and the mushrooms. So I didn't want to overpower it. Maybe you have somebody who doesn't like fresh tomatoes in there. You could do a little bit of tomato sauce mixed in with your rice. If you've got some at home, maybe, sometimes people are texturally, people don't like them. So we're going to move this off. Okay. I think going to work. I'm going to move my pan and work where my cutting board is so you can really see what I'm going to do here. Here we go. All right. I got a nice another pan on the stove here. I'm going to turn that on and I'm going to use butter to really get a nice saute on my mushrooms. And the butter is going to brown itself. And what that's going to do is it's going to help the mushrooms also to brown a little bit and add a little bit more color. So I'm going to get this super, super, super hot to the point of my butter is almost browned or burnt and my pan is really smoking. And that's when I want to put my mushrooms in there so that we get a really beautiful color on them. I'm going to take a look at this. And so this has been simmering, I don't know, 15, 20 minutes. Our carrots are really starting to soften up. There's great flavor in it. Nothing is overpowering. That allspice is not too much. And I have to tell you that what really makes this dish phenomenal at the end is just making up our little pesto at the last minute with some cilantro and parsley and garlic and pureeing that with a little olive oil and lemon juice. That going over the top just adds a beautiful brightness and a great flavor to finish it off. So it's fantastic. I've got my nice butter here. I'm gonna go right into the bottom of the pan.
So Kim, we have a couple minutes left, just so you know.
Yep.
Are you okay to go over? And
I am, if you are.
okay, yeah, and attend. What's that?
It won't be super long over, but
okay, that's fine. Yeah, and if folks can't stay, this is being recorded, so it'll be up on our YouTube channel most likely later today. Okay. Thank you.
Perfect. I think it'll probably only be 5 to 7 minutes over. That way I can at least get the stuffing done. It's pretty self-explanatory after that. You put them in the peppers, you put the peppers back in the oven. But I would like to maybe just even pull together the pesto.
Yep.
But again, that's very easy to do as well. You'd think after doing, remote teaching for a year and many of these that I'd have my timing down perfect to get it all done in an hour, but I never do.
Not a problem. I take forever to cook, so.
So you share so much information, it's hard to plan.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I sometimes get off on a tangent too, and I apologize for that. I just love, love, love sharing my information, and sometimes I share too much.
I don't think so. I think it's all been very helpful. And I've been doing everything backwards this whole time. I have been not rinsing my rice, but rinsing my mushrooms. So now I have to reverse that.
Me too.
You know what? A lot of people do, and depending on what you're doing. So if I was going to put my mushrooms in, let's say, a stew or something like that, then that would probably be okay. But where you really want to get some beautiful flavor out of them and color, yeah, definitely. And the funny thing is I used to do that as well. And then I worked with another chef, and and he said, think about what you're doing. And he walked me through this whole process and showed me, his way of cooking mushrooms. And I went, huh. I guess I can still learn something too.
Yeah, always, definitely.
All right, so that's just about ready to go. I'm just waiting. This is the hardest part, is the waiting for the pan to get hot and to be perfect. And yeah, patience is not one of the easiest things in the kitchen, but these are one of those times where you really got to be patient. I'm getting there.
Yes, I think rock legend Tom Petty had a song called "The Waiting is the Hardest Part." So yeah.
Yeah, very true. All right, so my butter is nice and frothy. It's pretty hot, and I'm just gonna get all my mushrooms right in there, and I'm just gonna let them sit. And we'll give those a few minutes to get cooked off. Meantime, I am gonna bring this closer to you so you guys can see this. So I think you can get a kind of a good look at that. It's kind of, it's not very brothy, so it really is a good stew-like consistency. You've got a little tomato in there. You've got your broth. Again, doing that in the crock pot, it's going to cook long time. And this does not need, my butternut is just about there. My carrots are just about there. Yeah, it doesn't need any salt or any flavor. There was a perfect amount with what I tossed with the vegetables and the cooking stock and everything. The one thing that it's missing that I realized that I did not put in there is a jalapeno. So if you like a bite to something, I would definitely, I missed the jalapeno. I could add a little crushed red pepper right at the end. I could add a little cayenne pepper, but the flavor on this is phenomenal. It's incredibly different. Because of the real tomato product in there, and with the apricots and the raisins, and it's just a really, really great flavor. So my mushrooms are cooking here. We'll give them just another minute. In the meantime, maybe we can pop over and I can get this pesto made really quick. That way we don't have to keep everybody so long. And so my pesto is mostly cilantro. Okay, so I usually buy it either in a smaller container, or you can buy, they have jars of chopped pesto, which are fantastic. Not pesto, chopped cilantro, sorry. They're fantastic because they've done all the work for you. They've chopped it all. You don't have to take it off the stem. You don't have to make a mess of it. And it's dried, and it's a great product to use. Now you'll notice, I just ripped my stems right off, and I took just the big stems. There are a lot of stems in my cilantro here for my pesto. Not a big deal because I'm going to puree it. If I was putting it in a salsa, I probably would take some more stems out. That's, again, a pet peeve of mine. I know a lot of people who don't mind and put the stems in there. I don't like it. So we're going to have probably a good half a bunch of cilantro and a little bit of parsley. So the parsley is going to do two things. It's going to give it great color, a little bit of flavor, but it's not going to overpower the cilantro. You really want this to be about the cilantro. And I am not going to use the stems for the parsley because those are a lot larger. And I'm going to go give it a quick rinse. And I haven't touched my mushrooms here. You can see that they've shrunk quite a bit. I'm going to shake them now. And they're really starting to get a beautiful caramelized brown color. which is exactly what we want. And literally, I'm just going to let them sit and cook. It's very hard because your instinct is as soon as you get them in the pan, you want to move them around. And you just can't. You just have to let them sit there. And that's how you get that beautiful golden color, and they're crisp on the outside, and they just taste so much better. Okay, so parsley, cilantro in a bowl. We're going to do 1 garlic clove. And so that was supposed to be a cup of cilantro, a half a cup of parsley, 1 clove of garlic. And I'm going to smash that up a little bit because it's all going to go into the food processor with the juice of half a lemon. And then I believe it's about a half a cup of olive oil. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to add the olive oil slowly, kind of like as if I was making a dressing. You could make this by hand. It would be helpful if you had somebody to work with you because it's hard to drizzle all the oil and stir continuously at the same time, but you can do it. So my mushrooms are good here. I'm going to take those right out. They're nice. See how much they cooked down? There's really not a lot left there. We're going to put a little more olive oil in the pan. We're going to do onions and garlic, and then we'll fold the rest of everything together. So that's doing, okay, finish this up. Got my juice there. I'm going to roll my lemon. Rolling it is going to help get the juice to really come out. I'm going to squeeze that right into my bowl. And
how much cilantro was in it?
about a cup.
Okay. And then what was the other ingredient? Parsley?
Yeah.
And that's half a cup?
Just half a cup. So.
Okay. And a cup of olive oil or half a cup?
I'm going to check and see what I wrote down here. It's supposed to be a half a cup.
Okay, thank you.
No problem. Okay, onions and garlic going. Soup is good over here. We're just going to throw this into a little food processor. I'm going to put a little oil in it now because I'm going to try and get that to puree, and that's going to be a little bit tougher to do. Actually, I'm going to put a little bit more of it in here. So I've got kind of a little shake blender, and unfortunately, it's not going to grind real well because it's mostly herbs. So you really need a food processor for this or something where you can get enough liquid in there. I am going to mute myself briefly while I do this because it's going to be really noisy, and then I will be right back. Okay, my onions are good here. The tomatoes are going to go in. And yeah, we're just about, let me get this finished up so we can let you guys go. Onions, garlic, tomatoes, mushrooms are going to go back in. Rice is going to go in. Greek seasoning, okay, about a tablespoon of Greek seasoning is going to go in there. And that's usually, if you don't have that, you could substitute oregano, a little marjoram. Mushrooms are going to go right in there. And now I'm going to turn this off. The last thing that I would put in here would be my feta cheese. My feta is going to go in now because I turned the pan off, and then I'm going to fold my feta in and then stuff that into the peppers. And when you put that back in the oven, your feta is going to melt, and it's going to get nice and broken up in there, and the flavor is just great. So again, you can see how a little bit of spinach in there would be gorgeous. That would just make the color beautiful. And I don't like to let this cook too long here because I don't want my tomatoes to be mushy. I really want them to just be nice and fresh and bright. And again, lots of good flavor. So I am going to check, however, salt and pepper because I didn't add any. Mushrooms have such great flavor. Add a little salt and pepper. Again, I'm going to go easy because I can always add. I'm going to add some with our feta cheese here. And this is probably about a half cup in there. I like feta, so I don't mind putting a lot in there. I think it's got great, great flavor. And I'm just going to stir that in. I turned off my stew. My pesto is not working out so well. I think my blender just died. So that's going to have to be finished by hand. But essentially, it's like you would have a basil pesto. Chop up all your herbs, add some oil and some lemon, and that goes on top of the stew, and that just adds a beautiful brightness to it. So this is all set. There's my stuffing for my peppers. Feta cheese, mushrooms, and spinach. Fantastic. The mushroom has so much meat to it and great flavor. And the last thing I would do right now is go ahead and stuff these into our pepper. And again, so this 3/4 of a cup of rice will easily do four pepper halves, 2 whole peppers. You could probably even get 3 out of this, depending on how much you want to stuff these. I like to overstuff mine. And that's why, I'm happy eating only a half, because there's a lot of stuff in there. So let me just stuff one more, and then I don't think I can show you the pesto because I can probably get it out of there and show you, but since I'm already over, I will open the floor if anybody has any questions or anything briefly so that I can let you go.
Does anybody have any questions they want to ask? Feel free to throw them in the chat.
And otherwise, I thank you so much for sticking around with me on a beautiful Saturday morning and enjoying some recipes. I never did get to talk about the other two. The cacciatore is very easy. It's just a different method of doing it. It's a lot less work. Throw everything in a pan, basically, in the oven, and it's got phenomenal flavor with the red wine butter that you make for it. And ramen, who doesn't love a good ramen? And it's a much nicer, healthier version of a ramen. And I've made it a couple of times, and my husband, who's skeptical sometimes, absolutely loves it. So he gave it a thumbs up, and I knew it was a winner then. So yeah. Oh, here, I was going to show you the pesto too. Let me finish stuffing this. So you can see I really overstuffed these already, and I still have more in the pan. So I can go back and I can add more to each pepper. I only have enough probably for maybe one more, but if I really overstuff those, I can get those filled up a little bit more. And last but not least, yeah, so it died on me. So I'm going to have to get in there and chop it up by hand and mix a little bit more olive oil in there. But that's going to make a beautiful bright topping for the top of my stew. And my stew is complete. It's got great flavor. It's colorful. It's gorgeous. Everything is cooked. Ladle that into a bowl and put a little bit of your chopped herb mixture on top. And you have got yourself a phenomenal dinner.
Looks wonderful.
Yeah. And I ate that, last week when it was 60 degrees out, and it wasn't too heavy. It wasn't as though it was something that I really wanted for wintertime. And the flavor was absolutely incredible. So,
Well, tomorrow's supposed to be not great weather, so I might try it.
my husband, I said, oh, we're going to have some turkey stew tomorrow. And so I'm excited about that. So I'm just going to finish chopping my pesto by hand. But it's just going to have great flavor. I'll mix in a little bit more olive oil when we're done. And that's going to be the finishing touch. And I'm sorry that I went over yet again.
Not a problem. Well, thank you so much, Kim. It was nice to join you this morning and, get ready to be hungry for lunch in an hour or so.
So now you can get a better idea of what it looks like and how it's an herb blend. I'm going to mix it with olive oil so that I can really kind of make it a sauce. And that's going to be fantastic going over my stew.
Wonderful.
So that's it. I promise I'm done now.
All right. Well, thank you. Thank you so much. Everybody
you.
enjoy the rest of your day. This will be up on YouTube, hopefully later today, so you can revisit it if you missed something. And all of our other cooking and nutrition classes from the past year are on our YouTube nutrition and cooking playlist as well. Enjoy your day.
Thank you, Chef Kim.
Thank you very much.